Hello and welcome. You're watching India Global. I'm Gauri Dwivedi. Today we are going to focus on the war in the Middle East. Today is the 7th of October. It's the second anniversary of the war that continues to rage on. We're going to get you all those details, including the latest as far as the peace talks is concerned. But first up, the headlines. Talks on Trump's Gaza ceasefire hostage proposal are underway in Cairo between Israel and Hamas negotiators. Memorial erected to honor the October 7 victims at the Nova Music Festival site on the second anniversary of the dastardly attacks. And explosions witnessed inside Gaza Strip on the anniversary of 7th of October as negotiators jostle for peace in Cairo. Viewers, it's 2 years on since the dastardly attacks took place in the Nova Music Festival. Over 1,200 people across different nationalities were butchered by Hamas. They came through those parachutes, came inside the Nova Music Festival, butchered 1,200 people and took over 200 hostages. Since then, the war has been raging on and it's been 2 years. Their lives have been lost on both sides, even as efforts are being made to bring back some of those hostages who are still feared to be there in those dungeons inside the tunnel network constructed by Hamas deep inside its territory. 20 of those hostages are alive, 28 are dead, and those dead bodies are with Hamas. Those are the only bargaining chips that Hamas still has. But as far as the big issues are concerned, let's tell you why exactly this episode today on India Global is going to focus on the three important aspects that we will now tell you. First and foremost, what really has happened as far as 2 years are concerned, the big milestones. Why is it that this is the biggest attack in recent history in Israel? And also, why is it that as far as this war is concerned, no peace solutions have been found so far? That's the first important thing that I'm going to talk about on the show. The second important aspect is what all has been really achieved in terms of those milestones with regard to peace, and are we probably the closest in terms of peace? And the third important aspect that I'm going to be talking today on India Global is what happens if any of those peace talks actually fail. Those are the scenarios. We're going to put that out for you viewers. But first up, let's get you what exactly are the sticking points that exist right now. There are talks that are taking place in Cairo. These are talks that are being negotiated through Egypt. This is probably the closest that the world is coming in terms of a possible peace scenario. On your screens are some of those points that we are putting out. First and foremost, the sticking points. Remember, these talks have been going on for some time. They've broken through in the past as well, but probably they're the closest right now. First and foremost, let's get you the sticking points, and then I'm going to tell you more in terms of why today marks an extremely important pivotal moment as far as this war is concerned. The sticking points, first and foremost, the hostage release structure. 72-hour timeline has been given. Now, why is it unrealistic? Because 28 people are dead. Now, Hamas says that it needs more time to be able to get those dead bodies, and which is why it feels that this 72 hours is not possible. Second important aspect, disarmament of Hamas. Now, Israel has been very clear in saying that it needs to get the Hamas to be completely disarmed, because who knows, they're going to do this all over again. Remember, they actually have a very elaborate tunnel network which still remains. Despite 2 years of bombardment, that tunnel network hasn't been demolished. So unless and until Hamas completely disarms itself, then this is a deal breaker for Israel. Third important aspect of why these talks are not going to be so easy, governance of Gaza. That's the third important point. What is the role of Hamas in ruling Gaza? Well, Israel says nothing. It cannot have any role, because if it does, then the entire peace talks falls apart. And last and important part is Israeli withdrawal. Now, there's a vague wording in terms of withdrawal, and there's not a clear timeline when that withdrawal actually takes place, and which is what Hamas says is actually another issue which could be deeply disturbing in terms of finding any lasting peace in this region. We're going to put that entire jigsaw puzzle in place for you, but I'm going to play out this report, viewers, because once you talk about the peace aspect of it, let's come to camera one. When you talk about the peace aspect, and when you talk about what are the several aspects that are there, one needs to keep in mind the human cost of this tragedy. And this report tells you exactly what all has been lost in terms of people's lives, livelihood, houses, and dreams being completely shattered. Take a look.
Two years after the October 7 attack, Israel and Gaza remain bound by deep scars and demanding questions. Scenes like these are reminders of a nation's struggle to rebuild, to remember, and to ensure it never happens again. Across the border, Gaza endures fresh turmoil. Even today, smoke and uncertainty hang in the air as leaders inch closer to new peace proposals.
היא לתחום את המשא ומתן הזה בימים בודדים. ושמעתם את הנשיא טראמפ הערב. הוא אמר בבירור, לא נסבול לו תרגילי דחייה, משיכת זמן או התחמקות מצד החמאס. עכשיו, בשלב השני, החמאס יפורק מנשקו והרצועה תפורז. זה יקרה או בדרך מדינית לפי תוכנית טראמפ, או בדרך צבאית, על ידינו.
Resolute, Israel's leadership pledges to reclaim hostages and push for lasting security. A promise echoed by families in Tel Aviv's restless streets. The pain of separation gives rise to protest. Mothers, fathers, and children standing firm in their fight for answers.
For the moment, what I think is that we all have to focus on President Trump framework on clause 1. That all the hostages will be released in 72 hours with no delays, as President Trump asked for. I think that for the building the international security control in Gaza.
In Gaza too, heartbreak persists, with families uprooted and aid workers racing against time to save lives. In crowded hospital corridors, the cost of war is counted in the lives of children and resilience of the exhausted staff. Global voices urge reason. At the UN, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas moves to distance his people from violence while renewing calls for justice. Humanitarian agencies plead for ceasefire, with urgent appeals echoing from Geneva to Jerusalem.
You've got new mothers and vulnerable newborns who are lying on the floor, hospital corridors. I sat with 3 premature babies who were sharing a single oxygen source. They share it 20 minutes each. The other 2 children cry whilst the third child gets that oxygen for 20 minutes.
As the world rallies for peace, powerful images emerge. Voices united for Gaza's future. For the people of Israel and Gaza, the memory of October 7 endures. But with every protest, every negotiation, hope lives for change. And the possibility that by next year, headlines will tell a story not of war, but of peace. Mohammad Ghazali, NDTV Bureau Report.
Okay, so viewers, as we speak right now, I brought you up to speed with the fact that the human misery that's been underway for the last 2 years on both sides. There are families of the victims who are crying out for justice, hostages who haven't seen daylight for over 2 years, and citizens, civilians on Gaza who've been at the receiving end of relentless bombarding from Israel's side? Because they've been very clear that till the time hostages are released, they will not stop, which is why these talks in Cairo are going to be extremely critical. Will that lead to peace? Forget even lasting peace. Forget how long will that last? Can there even be a peace deal right now that would end the misery for some time is the larger question. Let's get in our big voices. Joining me on the broadcast, Mohammed Khatibi, as well as Mr. Wagmar, who's joining me from London. In fact, Mr. Khatibi, let me ask you this. How hopeful are you that the talks that are currently on in Cairo will lead through some sort of a breakthrough?
So this is a very good step forward in 2 years, but I don't think that this will be easy because there are so many issues with the ideas that are being projected in this. So the important issues, as you mentioned in your introduction, the issue of captives and the issue of, I think you got, I lost. The issue of captives and the issue of Israeli withdrawal are important factors here. Hamas will not relinquish its weapons, and also another point that needs
those
to
are
be
all deal breakers then,
said here,
essentially,
if
Mr. Khatibi,
even
those
Hamas
are all
agrees
deal
to
breakers.
this.
That's what it ends up becoming, right? Those are all deal breakers. Let's get in Mr. Wagmar as well for more expectations from the Cairo talks. How hopeful are you that at least some sort of a peace deal could be thrashed out?
It could be everything or nothing is how it stands just now. In the last 24 hours since talks commenced in Egypt, Hamas has thrown another spanner in the works because over the weekend, Mr. Netanyahu and Israel agreed to the release of 250 hardcore Palestinian militants who are doing life sentences for murdering Israelis. Now Hamas wants 295, which was not part of the original framework package. So that has been thrown up as point number one, Gauri. Point number two, if I may iterate, it's not just a question of hostages and people murdered, but on the second anniversary, we ought to iterate it was the deliberate murdering of Jews and Jews en masse not seen since the Holocaust and 1945. That needs to be foregrounded too. The third point is the so-called deal breaker about would Israel not renege? Well, once the Board of Peace comes into effect, the GITA, Gaza International Transitional Authority as we know it, Israel will make progressive withdrawals from 55 to 40 to 15% of the Gaza Strip territory as the international peacekeeping force enters and the strip is secured, along with the Palestinian police who are expected to do their bit too. But that will happen once the smuggling and terror networks of those tunnels can be cleansed out. Please remember
exactly,
that
and those tunnels stay. Those tunnels haven't been demolished, they stay.
Precisely, and Gauri, all your viewers need to know this. The tunnels in question are more extensive than the entire London Underground network. The entire London Underground network is smaller compared to the entire terrorist tunnel network of the Gaza Strip. That is a patent fact. And also, Israel will want to see that those tunnels are not being used because guerrilla operations is what is currently going on. This has become a war of attrition.
Then let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, Mr. Wagmar.
Warfare.
Let me ask you this, that, you know, what you are mentioning are very important aspects, which is that, you know, even Hamas says, I'm not going to disarm. I may let go of rockets, but I'm going to keep the AK-47s and the Kalashnikovs and so on and so forth for self-protection. Add to it the fact that the tunnel network stays. How are we then looking at any of these being resolved in Cairo right now?
And the other problem is also of the release of actual cadavers, rotten cadavers of bodies 2 years on, plus the alleged 20 who are alive. And that boggles the mind, Gauri, for the simple reason, as I ask this as a historian, How are they going to even undertake a mass stage release of that? Because most of Hamas's top brass has been exterminated, as you know. So there is nobody even on ground to do it. And then they will throw up that excuse that we cannot logistically undertake this. And once again, they would want a deadline extension. And they know this only too well for two other sinister reasons. Number one, Mr. Trump's impulsiveness, because he's not a man interested in details or actually seeing through something completely executed. He tends to move on to the next topic given his attention time span.
Yeah.
And number two are the global hard left progressive politics and the politics of disaffection
Yes.
by metropolitan elites. And
Yes.
Hamas is on record stating this, Gauri, that we are galvanized by the protests that we see across Western campuses and streets,
Right.
because it makes us perversely believe that we are correct in the court of public opinion,
Okay.
and we ought not flinch and give way
All
to
your points are well
releasing the
taken.
hostages.
All your points are well taken, but it also just puts a huge question mark about any of the efforts being made right now leading to any breakthrough. I'm out of time, but Mohammad Khatibi, in the spirit of fairness, you're joining us from Tehran. Quick word, what do you expect from today in the event of any progress whatsoever, or do you agree with Mr. Wagmar saying it's all or nothing on the table?
I don't think that will happen, because if Hamas agrees to relinquish its weapons, some smaller groups like Islamic Jihad will not do so, because we have seen this before with Fatah, and Hamas came up
Yes.
with arming, and this will continue. So the issue here is more about Israel's willingness to end these attacks on Gaza Strip.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. It's
many
also
people
about
believe-
Hamas's willingness to ensure that those hostages come out. 20 of them are alive, 28 dead bodies. And as Mr. Wagmar said, how are those cadavers going to be, handed over to the families, and what conditions would they be? Those are separate questions as far as logistics and execution is concerned, which will come to only and only if there is some breakthrough in these talks. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks so much, gentlemen, for joining me on India Global. Well, viewers, on that note, we slip into a very short break. We come back on the other side and talk more about what happens in the event that these talks do not lead to any breakthrough whatsoever. What will be the fallout besides Donald Trump's Nobel aspirations? Now, viewers, as I had said, let's also look at the possibility of these two talks that are taking place, whether they actually lead to a breakthrough and what happens in the event that they don't. Let's put out those scenarios for you here to understand where things stand right now. Now, in the event that talks succeed, now first and foremost, what happens is that the hostages get freed. That includes 20 alive, 28 who are dead, but their bodies are still with Hamas. And troops will start withdrawing from Gaza. How they happen, the timeline of that is a separate issue, but there is agreement on their withdrawal. Second important part, the ceasefire holds as deal gains traction. Now, this ceasefire, how long it will hold, whether there will be some finality to it, a long-term roadmap, all that hinges on the talks actually succeeding to some sort of a breakthrough. So that could be the other important aspect of it. Third and equally important would be that 8 trucks would start going inside Rafah. There is a huge civilian casualty, huge civilian crisis with regard to food and other essential items. That could be prioritized once the hostage deal and the peace deal gets closed and succeeds. Lastly, the other two important part, Hamas signals readiness to disarm. Now, that's the single biggest aspect of lasting peace in the region, because Hamas still has a very large tunnel network. It has huge cache of arms and also wants to govern in the post-war Gaza. So if they are able to set aside these ambitions and ensure that Hamas doesn't have any say, then that could be an element leading to lasting peace. Lastly, path to Palestinian autonomy reopens. What will that be? Will that eventually lead to a separate country? How soon can that happen? All those negotiations and talks will actually come if the talks succeed. Now let's look at the other scenario, that what's happening in Cairo actually leads to nothing in terms of positivity. What happens then? First and foremost, well, bombing resumes. It's already continuing. It's not like it's completely stopped, but it renews with a fresh vigor because Israel realizes that there is no other option to get those 20 alive and 28 dead hostages that are still with Hamas, the only bargaining chip that the terror organization has. Secondly, it halts any withdrawal of its troops, which means the ground assault continues with even more focus on bombarding the area and completely demolishing Hamas. Hostage deal falls apart in Egypt. What happens to the families of those? Well, one cannot even begin to really put that in words. Then Hamas vows retaliation. How will that be armed? Who will arm it? The funding lines, the arms, the weapons, all of that then leads to greater uncertainty and puts the entire region in more spiral of uncertainty and chaos. And lastly, well, you can expect more global protests to actually follow. They've already been there. One can argue that maybe the information war or the propaganda war is something that Israel lost even as it continued to make deep military gains on the battlefield. All that will come back with fresh vigor because there is no deal that is really on the table. To talk more on this, let's get in Professor Jangid, who of the OP Jindal University, along with Professor Scott Lucas, joining me on the broadcast. Thank you so much, both of you gentlemen. Professor Lucas, let me start by asking you your thoughts on these two scenarios we put out here. Which of the two look more realistic right now?
Well, I think it's important to cut through the rhetoric that you had just before the break to set out the facts without making a prediction of where we land. First, there is the question of the timing of the release of those 20 hostages held by Hamas and those 28 bodies with respect to two things. First is the release of Palestinians who have been held by the Israelis. And contrary to what you heard just before the break, these aren't all just, quote, terrorists. These include, for example, the man who could be the leader of a Palestinian movement if we do get a ceasefire, which is Mariam Barghouti, who has been held for more than 20 years by the Israelis. Secondly, it is also tied to the question of Israeli withdrawal, which is very vague in the Trump 20-point sketch. How far back do the Israeli troops pull back? Is this on a long-term basis? Not really defined at this point. And then you get to the wider issues that are going to be, require a lot of negotiation. For example, considering the governance arrangements. The plan has no Palestinian representation on this international board, which supposedly is going to be headed by Donald Trump. And then secondly, you have this day-to-day body to administer the strip.
Professor Jangid, let me get in, Professor Jangid, on the specific points that you've raised. Go ahead.
Thank you. I do think that Donald Trump needs to compromise a bit more. On 20th of January, before taking the oath, he really threatened Hamas that a hell is coming if you don't release the prisoners. And Hamas really survived all the threats and ultimatums that Donald Trump issued or the military invasion that Israel is up to. I think what has happened in this deal, which I think is a brighter side of the deal, is that Hamas has been given enough political space to call it a victory. Hamas will have to, will not have to leave Gaza if they renounce violence. Those who will keep fighting can leave the Gaza and get to a country that will take them. And most importantly, Trump had to write this in 20 points that Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. I think these are really big, concessions on the part of Donald Trump, and I think he, more than Netanyahu, seems to be keen in ending this conflict. I think he has realized his blank check in terms of his political and full backing of the Israeli state for the last 8 months has now started biting him.
Okay.
It's a thing that he is tempted for the Nobel Peace Prize, and he should get it if he succeeds.
Which is why it's 72 hours. Remember, it has to be 72 hours and no longer than that. I'm afraid I have to leave it there, gentlemen. But we are going to continue this conversation because, unfortunately, covering all of this gives me a sense that this is not going to be solved in that one single meeting that will take place in Cairo. But I have to leave it here, viewers. Well, on that note, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of India Global. Thanks so much for watching.